All right. Why, number 3. Why did Jesus have to suffer, die, and deal with humiliation? Why did he have to go through all that? We've talked about several things. We've talked about the corruption of man. We've talked about sin. Today I want to talk to you about the reason why he had to go through this is so that you and I could have life. John 10:10, the Bible says, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, that he must be killed and 3 days later rise again. He spoke plainly about this. You see, I believe that abundant life is not a life where you and I don't have to walk through fire. Abundant life is not having everything easy, that everything goes right. Abundant life is not you get everything you want. I realize that I don't fly in a private jet, and I don't have a Bentley like some preachers, but one preacher, somebody sent me a clip, and I said, well, why would I want to listen to this? Anyway, because I don't like preachers. I'm sorry, I don't. I told that to one person one time, and they said, well, you are one. And I said, now you understand why. I don't like me most of the time. Well, isn't that kind of odd? Well, other than the fact that Paul said of sinners, I am the worst, I don't think it's odd to feel like that you don't deserve what God has given you. But he said, if you love God and you serve God, God is going to give you not just everything you need, but everything you want. My wife and I were driving to the mall there in Houston, and it was just filled because it was Christmas. And 2 days before Christmas, as we were pulling into the front of the mall, somebody pulled out in the front parking spot, and we pulled back in. And I said, God, thank you. Now I know you love me. And I'm going, really? God loves you because somebody pulled out of a parking spot just when you needed it? Well, yeah, I guess that's what it means. Therefore, all of you that go to the mall and you don't get a spot in the front, God doesn't like you. Really? You see, the truth about it is that an abundant life is not about not having difficulty in life. It's not. Abundant life is knowing that Jesus will walk through the fire with you. I want to make sure you understand that. Abundant life is knowing that Jesus will walk through the fire with you. I talk to people all the time. I was talking to somebody a long time ago, and they asked me about, my wife's cancer and, how she does that, and how it's only been 20 years, and said, we didn't know all that we would know until we went through the middle of it and came out the other side. You see, you don't even have a clue of what the fire is going to be like until you're in the middle of it. And the truth about it is that faith is not saying, God, I trust you so much that I'm not going to go into the fire. Faith is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego looking at the king and saying, throw us in the fire if you want. We don't care. If God saves us, great. If God chooses not to save us, great. We will not bow down to you. You see, Jesus Christ came and died on the cross so that you and I could walk through, in, around, over, and get to the other side of the fires of life. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have, because God has said. Help me out, come on. Do you not think it's odd that the writer of Hebrews connected having money with the idea that God is with us or not? God's blessing is not, I'm going to have a bunch of money. I'm going to have to be a little bit honest with you, though. Oftentimes, the lack of money we have is because we've not been obedient and faithful to God. You say, well, Karl, how can you say that? The Bible says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse and see if I will not pour forth a blessing. I won't tell you what, I can't count, I don't have enough appendages on my hands and feet to count the number of times God's turned a liquor bottle into a brand new home. Said, Karl, how in the world does God turn a liquor bottle into a brand new home? Well, he takes a man, he helps him not be an alcoholic anymore, and he can afford to provide a place for his family. Aha! Miracles happen. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You see, I believe with all my heart the biggest opportunity to turn from us was when Jesus could have balked at the cross. My wife raised a horse from a bottle, and his horse's name was Skipper. And matter of fact, Shelley and I'd already asked her to marry me 3 times before we ever went out on a date. Matter of fact, Shelley will tell you the worst date she ever had in her life was the first date I took her out on. But anyway, I decided one day I was going to go out to the family farm, and they had a spread out on the North 40, and she had a horse. She said, you want to ride my horse? And I said, yeah, it'd be great. She said, do you know how to ride a horse? And what did I say? Sure, I can ride a horse. I've been riding horses since I was a little kid. Matter of fact, I didn't tell her, but I remember the last time I had a horse of my own, and I got bucked off the front. My brother got bucked off the back. I mean, I remember that as though it was yesterday, and I don't know, I was, 2 or 3? So anyway, I said, yeah, I'll go with you. Beautiful Palomino horse, gelding, about 16 and a half hands tall. She said, I like to ride him bareback. How about you? And I said, that'll be fine with me. So she rode. I was having a hard time breathing. Boy, she was so beautiful on the horse. She said, it's your turn now. Just hop up there. And I'm going. So I hopped up on my horse bareback, and I said, well, no bridle? She said, no, Skipper's a good horse. Just grab hold of the manes and just do one of those little cluck-clucks. And so I cluck-cluck. She's walking, and Skipper, she didn't tell me, but Skipper doesn't like water holes. So Skipper and I are just moseying on, and I'm talking to Shelley, and I'm looking down at her, and she's smiling up at me, and I'm going, boy, I wish she would finally say yes. And Skipper came to the water hole and stopped, and I went, doop. Have you ever heard or seen a horse laugh? I promise you, I fell off. Skipper put his nose into my face and laughed at me and said, that's my woman. Back up, dude. Please don't step on me. Anyway, he just balked at that water hole. Jesus 3 times looks at God and says, God, if there's any way this cup can pass from me, please let it do so. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours. Jesus could have balked at the cross, but he didn't. You see, God understood the reason why Jesus had to go to the cross is not just because we were guilty, not just because we had sin, but that God wanted us to have life. Ephesians chapter 2, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sin in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of air, who is the spirit that is now at work in those who are disobedient. Just leave it right there. Go back, please. You followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air. Do you understand that most of the people that live in our culture today do not make decisions of their own? They're led by the nose like a cow to the slaughter with a nose ring. You're going, nah, yeah. It happens all the time. I mean, think about it. You ready? Okay. In my wife's closet is a gorgeous Barbie doll. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a Gone with the Wind Barbie doll. My mother gave it to my wife. My wife is going to give it to her oldest granddaughter. Gorgeous Barbie doll. Therefore, they're kept perfect on a shelf, waiting for them to get old enough not to play with them. Oh, Sophie is in here. Good God. Okay. Keep her occupied for just a minute. Okay. Because they're not play with Barbie dolls. You see, my mother's mother used to collect those Barbie dolls. You know what I'm talking about? Because at one point in time, they brought megabucks. Because they just weren't the Barbie dolls. They weren't the collectible Barbie dolls. They were the super duper special, really collectible Barbie dolls. People would go to convention trying to find those super duper, really collectible Barbie dolls. I've got a case of coins at my house. Matter of fact, I've helped people sell them now. The state's quarters. Matter of fact, you could buy them covered in either gold or platinum, and you could buy them for the mint for $17.50 plus another $7.95 shipping and handling. You know what they're worth now? A quarter piece. You know why they did that? Because every one of them they took out of circulation, they could write off a quarter and make extra money. Because they saw across the foreheads of people this big sign that said, gullible. We're right there now as a culture. I had a floor that I had to fix, and I went and bought a sheet of plywood in Abilene, Texas at the Home Depot. It was a half-inch sheet of plywood, and it cost $79.50 for one sheet of plywood. 2 years ago, that sheet of plywood was $17.50, $17.75. This year, interest rates are going to have to go up another 1 to 2, maybe 3%. Housing interest rates are going to go up to 6 or 7%. And what's going to happen, folks? Come on, what's going to happen? The median home in the United States now is a little over $400,000. It's only increased to $158,000 in the last 18 months. What's going to happen, folks? Come on. And we're happy about it. I talked to the guy the other day. I'm sitting down and we're doing our round table discussion. He said, man, preacher, you ought to see my new truck. I bought me a brand new truck. I said, you brought you a brand new truck? He said, yeah, man, I bought me a brand new diesel pickup. And I said, you know, I looked at some of those. I said, it's brand new. He says, yeah, it's brand new to me. It's only got 105,000 miles on it. It's 4 years old. And I said, you know, but it's awful clean for that. He said, yeah, preacher, I only had to pay $68,000 for it. I said, you realize that the sticker on that thing new is only like $5,000 more than that. Yeah, but they don't have any new ones, so I had to buy this one. I said, you had to buy? What happened to the other truck? Well, I was kind of tired of it, and they had this one available, and I'm going, you're kidding me, right? That's where our culture is. We're addicted to what our eyes see, our ears hear, and what our heart wants. In which you used to live when you follow the ways of the world and the ruler of the kingdom of air, the spirit which is now at work to those who are disobedient. All of us lived among them at one time, gratifying what? The cravings of our flesh, following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving wrath. Basically, Paul said, the truth about it is that you're actually going to get what you deserve. When things have leveled out in the next 6 to 12 months, There's no longer a chip shortage because nobody can afford the 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 13% interest on a new car. What's going to be on vehicle lots all over the place? New cars. And what's going to do to the old value of the older cars that people have spent 40 to 50% more than they're actually worth? This truck with no warranty, no nothing, that's got 105,000, now it's going to about 150, 160, 170,000 miles. He's going to go to his wife and say, baby, I've got to get a new truck. They're going to go to the dealership and they're going to look at it and say, well, you know, we might can give you 8 for that. Am I lying? Why ain't anybody standing up yelling, don't do that? It's breaking my heart. Like the rest of us, we're by nature deserving of wrath. He's not only talking about the wrath that our sin brings, which is separation from God, but do you understand that when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God said, because of this, you're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow. You're going to have to deal with thorn bushes and stickers, that there's going to be enmity between you and your wife. You're going to have arguments. I promise you, in 2 or 3 years, couples are going to be sitting out at a table and they're going to go, how do we get out from underneath this? How did we get here? Well, you did it. No, you did. Well, you told me I could. Because we're led around by the world. Not by the Spirit of God. Not by wisdom. Not by the truth of God's Word. But we're like puppets being led by a what do you call the guy that holds the marionette strings? The puppeteer. Somebody said, well, why don't you listen to those newscasts anymore? Because they're puppeteers. You say, well, no, Karl, Fox isn't a puppeteer. Yeah, really? CNN's not, really? Show me somebody on national news media that's sitting down and saying, here's the facts. Unembellished, unencumbered, this is what's happening, period. See, Jesus went to the cross and he bled and died so that you and I would no longer be manipulated by the world. That we would no longer be pushed or driven by the world's desires. You come to the place you go, I don't care if the world likes me or not. I'm not playing to the crowd of the world. Jesus Christ died for me. And I can serve him with freedom and with grace. And I know at the end of the day, if God is pleased with me, then I'm okay. Ephesians 2. All of us who lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of the flesh. He continues on, but because of his great love for us, because God knew that we would be led by our basic instincts, because God knew that we would be addicted to the desires of the flesh, because God knew that we would struggle unless we have victory in life. His great love for us, God is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved. God knew that even though we were manipulated by the world, addicted by the world, dominated by the world, Jesus died to break the stranglehold on us when we understand the depth of his love. We understand the depth of his promise. When you understand what Jesus had to go through so that we could have life, you understand what he's willing to go through so that we would have life. Ephesians 3:16 and 18, the writer says this, Paul, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. Have you ever heard the phrase man up? Woman up? That means, I'm not going to be pushed. I'm not going to be led by this world. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's people. So that you can grasp, do what? You can grasp how wide and how deep is the love of Christ, to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with a measure of all fullness of God. Somebody once asked me, how can I keep my kids from chasing after the world? Make sure they're filled up with Jesus. That's it. Go to any school today. It even starts in elementary school. Kids travel in pack. They follow the pack. They follow the pack. You know the kids I love? I love the kids that don't care about the pack. Those are the ones that are going to change the world. Those that are willing to say, I'm going to go out and discover. I'm going to go out and look at the possibilities. How does that come about? How does a child, how does a teenager, how does a young adult have that power to... Sorry, they started working on my knees this week and I can't move it that way. I just have to stand up. Lord, don't let me fall down. How do you put that in a kid? Every single time I hold my grandchildren in my lap, I pray over and pray for them. Even little Dana, just a year old. Dana, do you know that God made you beautiful and you're special? I'll take little Sophia and we'll dance, and hold up, Baptists aren't supposed to dance. Well, I'm going to tell you what, you're not a man of God if you won't dance with your granddaughter. Get over it. And I'll pick her up and we'll dance around the floor and I'll sing to her and I'll tell her how wonderful she is and how beautiful he is and she is and how God made her unique and God made her special. That's what Paul is saying in Ephesians 3. If you and I would come to a place where we realize how unique and how special we are with God, all that other junk that the world wants to lead you around with doesn't matter. When you and I realize I'm a child of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and Jesus loved me so much that he died on the cross for me, he took a beating for me, they stripped him for me, he took humiliation for me, I go, I can handle it. I love that old hymn, oh, how I love Jesus, oh, how I love Jesus, oh, how I love Jesus. Why? Because he first loved me. You see, the truth is facing our fires. Facing our fires mean that there's something more important than the fire. 2 Corinthians 9:8, and God who is able to bless you abundantly, so that in, help me out, all things. You just stop right there, in all things. Now, so we understand the Greek of this, because Keenan does this Greek stuff all the time. I'm not as smart as Keenan, but I'm going to explain to you what the Greek means for all things. You ready? I'm going to do it by asking you one question. You ready? What is not all things? Yell it out. Don't say anything. Because the opposite of all, as the country boy said, is nothing, baby. So that in all things, all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. That means in the middle of the fire, whatever's going on in your life, whether it's cancer, it's sickness, it's death, it's a lack of job, it's inflation, it's a Republican in the White House, it's a Democrat in the White House, it's Congress in the outhouse, it doesn't make any difference. If I'm a child of God, a child of the King of Kings, that no matter what's going on, what bill's passing, what bill's flopping, who what's doing where, to whom, what, when, and how, it doesn't matter. In my life, Jesus died for me, and all things are going to work out, because as I walk through the fire, whether I made it, God made it, Satan made it, or hell itself made it, Jesus walked through it so I can handle it. And when I'm in the middle of it, all I've got to do is say, okay, Jesus, where are you? He's going to say, son, I'm right here, baby. I'm right here. I'm right here. That's why James said in 1:2-5, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it'll be given to you. When you and I are going through the fire, all we've got to do is say, okay, God, you're God. Jesus died for me. What we're going to do about this now? My favorite joke in all the world, I'm a Lone Ranger fan. I grew up watching Lone Ranger in black and white. Matter of fact, I actually remember listening to Lone Ranger on the radio. The Lone Ranger wins in the end, right? The bad guy always gets beat up. Lone Ranger always gets beat up. It always starts out with Lone Ranger getting beat up. And he had a trusty sidekick, Tonto. I always thought I was little Tonto, because during the summer I'd spend with my grandfather. He'd look at me and say, you dark like a little Indian boy. And I like being an Indian. When we played Cowboys and Indians, I was always Indian. I like being the underdog. My favorite joke is Lone Ranger and Tonto driving through the desert, Arizona. Indians were coming through the west, and Lone Ranger said, Tonto, what do we do? He said, let's go east, Kimosabe. So they turned around and went east. As they got to the east, it comes Comanches, 40 or 50 of them. Lone Ranger said, Tonto, what do we do? He said, let's go south, Kimosabe, and they headed south. They ran into 40 or 50 more Comanches coming from the south, and he said, Tonto, what do we do now, Tonto? He says, Kimosabe, east, I guess we go east. So they headed east, or north rather. They go north. Last direction they can go. They'd run into about 1,000 Indians. Lone Ranger says, Tonto, they're coming from the west, the east, the south, and the north. What do we do now, Tonto? And he goes, I don't know, paleface. Can I ask you a question? You ever look at life and say, the Indians are coming from the north, the south, east, and the west, and I'm surrounded? And you go, what do I do now? And the best advice you get is, I don't know. You know what I believe is the single greatest promise that God's ever given us? That last verse is verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. You know what that means? God is never going to look at you and say, well, You got yourself in this, you get yourself out. God's never going to start, well, let me tell you who's to blame for it. God's never going to look at you and say, come on, didn't you graduate second grade? God's going to look at you and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I was at the doctor's office last week, and he said, well, preacher, your knees are shot. And I said, tell me what I don't know. He said, well, they don't work anymore. They've got arthritis, and the meniscus is torn in them. Your ACL is ripped on the right, and it's shot on the left. I said, well, what are you and God going to do about it, Doc? One of my friends asked me today, he said, why did you pick that doctor? And I said, well, it's pretty simple. Said I went to the hospital with my dad and took him to get his knee surgery, and I'm waiting for the nurse. They're doing all this kind of stuff, and the doctor comes in, and he looks at me and said, Karl, right? And I said, yeah, Karl. He says, do you mind just a minute if I have some time with your dad? I said, yeah, I'm not going anywhere, Slick. What do you want to do? He says, well, before I operate, I want to make sure that God's involved in this. Do you mind if I pray with you and your dad before we suit up? Aha. Hey, Doc, when you get finished with my dad, my knees are shot. I need to get them fixed. He said, well, okay. I said, when you and God get ready, we'll get it done. I don't know what it is that you're going through. It might be as simple as you can't move your leg forward. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not. It's an accident, I promise you. I have a hard time not sitting on a stool, but I've been on the side of the road, and the doctor's called and said, Karl, go home because your wife's got cancer. I need to let her know. I've been there. I've been in a hospital room when the doctor looked at me and said, Karl, I know that Clyde's your best friend, but there's nothing we can do, Karl. He's got spinal meningitis. It's swollen his head. That's why there's blood running out of his ears. Karl, don't you think we just need to let him die? It was Clyde Fussell that sat on my front porch one night while the Klan was burning a cross in my yard, threatening to kill me because we allowed black people to join our church for the first time in 187 years. And Clyde said, Karl, I got my shotgun. You go inside and sleep with your wife. I got this covered. I looked at him and said, Clyde, you're 87. He said, but my buckshot I just bought yesterday, Karl, I got it covered. Now you go on to bed. I'll light them up. There's no problems. I sat in the middle of the floor of the emergency room at Franklinton Memorial Hospital and started crying like a baby. Clyde's daughter came in and said, oh my God, Karl, Clyde's dead. I said, no, he's not, sweetheart, but they said he's never going to make it. He'll never be able to talk again. He can never. Clyde and I had bulldozer races. Said he'll never be able to walk again. She said, you told him to go ahead and let him go, didn't you, Karl? And I said, yeah, that's how close we were. I said, Karl, God, I can't pastor this church without Clyde. When they wanted to fire me because I said a bad word. I can't use the bad word because folks here fussed at me too, and it comes right out of a verse of Scripture. I didn't know you couldn't preach all the Bible in churches, but I opened up the Bible, and Clyde looked at it and says, well, it's there in the Bible. Y'all quit messing with my preacher. Go home and find something else better to do. Get out of here. Clyde wasn't the chairman of the deacons. He just threatened to whoop all the deacons if they didn't get off my back. Finally, the doctor came and said, Karl, you got to get out of the floor. We need the room. I went home. My wife and my 3 kids, we all sat on the floor and we cried together. Clyde would take my kids around and fill up his shirt with rocks from the river. Keep Jesse separate, Rebecca's separate, Jonathan's all separate. Love my kids. That morning I got in my truck and I went to the hospital. I walked into Clyde's room. Clyde raised his head up and said, "Karl, what are you doing here?" "Huh?" "Clyde, they took you off the respirator last night." He goes, "Good." I went and got the doctor, said, "Doc, Clyde just called my name and said, 'Preacher, no, Clyde's never going, he'll never talk again, Karl.'" "Come with me." He said, "Karl, I've got a patient." And I said, "I can't say that publicly now." "All right, Karl." We walked in the room. Clyde raised his head up and he said, "Karl, coffee?" I said, "Doc, Clyde and I have coffee and pray with each other each morning. When I start the day of work, Clyde wants some coffee. Is okay?" And he said, "If meningitis isn't going to kill him, your coffee isn't either. Go get him some coffee, Karl." A week later, Clyde walked out of that hospital refusing to sit in a wheelchair. There is no explanation on the face of the earth. They brought in doctors from Tulane. They brought in doctors from Baton Rouge, trying to figure out how a guy with fever that's so high with brain swelling so that it would explode both of his earblums and he'd start bleeding out of his ears and out of his eyes, how a guy like that could walk on his own a week later. His daughter said it best. When I flew home 3 years later to carry Clyde to his final resting place, she said, "God knew that you'd never survive this place unless Clyde was here." Clyde didn't care what people thought about him. Clyde decided as a young man, as he was storming the beach on D-Day in the first wave, "I'm in the hands of God. I'm going to be the man God wants me to be." That's what I learned from Clyde Fussell. I love people. But I can have an abundant life over everything, even death, when I acknowledge the fact that I am God's chosen child. Paul said in 1 Corinthians as the band comes, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? But thanks be to God who gives victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." As I'm standing there beside the grave, lowering Clyde in, I said, "Mr. Clyde, it's going to be a little while, but get the bulldozer out. We're going to make some spots for my grandkids to play when I get to heaven up there with you." Clyde died with an amazing smile on his face. He couldn't hear worth a flip, but he could see. You know what I believe Clyde saw? Heaven open up. And Jesus looked down and said, "Come on, son. It's time to go see your wife." Now let me ask you a question. What in the world kind of fire could you be facing that would cause you to be discouraged, despondent, or afraid? When the God that created all the universe, when the God that looked at his son, his only begotten son, and says, son, I need you to go die so that they might have life. John 10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they might have life and have it abundantly. Do you want that abundant life? Say yes to Jesus. If you'd like to talk or pray with someone, I'll be hanging out in the back. Band, if you'd lead us in worship, please stand.